You are about to learn the exact 7-word sentence that can legally stop a police officer from searching your car. Most gun owners think saying no, or I have nothing to hide, or I support law enforcement is enough to protect them. It is not. If you don't use a very specific legal phrase, you are walking straight into a trap that can cost you thousands of dollars, your gun rights, and in some cases, your freedom. So let me show you exactly where this trap is set and how to shut it down. Picture this. You're driving home. Maybe you're coming back from the range. Maybe you're just leaving the grocery store. You see the lights in your rearview mirror. You pull over. Your heart rate spikes a little. It always does. The officer comes to the window. You keep your hands on the wheel. You're polite. You hand over your license and registration. If your state requires it, you properly declare your firearm. The officer runs your information, comes back, maybe gives you a ticket, maybe just a warning. He hands your license back. The stop feels over. Your shoulders drop. You relax. You're ready to put the car in drive and go home. And that is exactly when the trap snaps shut. Just as you're about to leave, the officer leans in casually, almost like he's your friend now, and says, "Hey, before you go, do you mind if I take a quick look in the back? We've had a lot of trafficking in the area recently. You don't have anything illegal, right? So you wouldn't mind if I just take a quick look?" This moment, right here, is the most dangerous 5 seconds of your life as a gun owner. Because if you say yes, or sure, or I have nothing to hide, you have just voluntarily waived your Fourth Amendment rights. You have given them permission to tear your car apart, open your locked cases, and potentially turn a 10-minute traffic stop into a legal nightmare. Today, we're going deep. I'm going to break down this consent trap, explain the difference between probable cause and consent, a difference most gun owners don't understand until it's too late. And most importantly, I'll give you the exact words, the specific script, to shut this down instantly, legally, and respectfully. Let's get into it. First, you need to understand why this plays out the way it does. Why do they wait until after they hand you your license back to ask to search? It's not an accident. It is training. In law enforcement, this is often called the doorknob question, or the transition to a consensual encounter. Legally, a traffic stop has a beginning, a middle, and an end. When the officer hands you your license and registration back and says, "Have a safe day," the legal seizure of the traffic stop is technically over. At that point, you are free to leave. By immediately asking you another question, the officer is trying to start a new interaction, a voluntary interaction. On paper, it's no longer a detention. It's just a conversation between two adults, and they know something very important about you. As a law-abiding citizen, you have a psychological need to be polite. You want to be the good guy. You support the police. You don't want to look suspicious or combative. They use that against you. They frame the request to search as a casual favor. "Do you mind if I look? You don't have anything to hide, right?" It sounds harmless. It sounds like if you say no, you're basically admitting you're guilty. But here's the reality. At that moment, the officer is not your buddy. He is an investigator looking for evidence of a crime. If he's asking to search your car, it means one very specific thing. He does not have enough evidence to search it legally without your help. Let that sink in. If an officer has probable cause, if he smells drugs, sees evidence of a crime, or observes something objectively illegal, he doesn't need to ask you for permission. Under the automobile exception to the Fourth Amendment, if he has probable cause, he can pull you out of the car and search it, whether you like it or not. So the moment an officer asks for your permission, he is admitting that he does not have that. He's fishing. He's hoping you'll be intimidated enough or polite enough to waive your rights for him. Being polite does not mean surrendering your civil liberties. To survive this interaction as a gun owner, you need to understand the two main ways police get into your vehicle. Method number 1 is probable cause. Probable cause means the officer has facts, objective, articulable facts, that would lead a reasonable person to believe there is a crime being committed or evidence of a crime in the car. If the officer smells marijuana, that's probable cause in many jurisdictions. If he sees an open beer bottle in the cup holder, probable cause. If he sees the barrel of a rifle sticking out from under a blanket in a state where that's illegal, probable cause. In those situations, your permission is irrelevant. He is going in, and there is very little you can do about it in that moment. Method number 2 is consent. This is where most people get trapped. Consent is when you give the officer the authority he doesn't currently have. The Supreme Court has ruled that officers do not have to tell you that you have the right to refuse. They don't have to read you Miranda rights before asking to search your trunk. They can simply ask, casually, "Mind if I take a quick look?" And if you say yes, you have changed the legal ground completely. If you consent, it becomes almost impossible to go into court later and argue that the search was illegal. You cannot argue that he had no reason to stop you or no reason to search. You opened the door. You invited the vampire in. Why is this especially dangerous for a gun owner? Let's say you are 100% legal. You have your permit. Your gun is stored correctly under your state law. But you say, "Sure, officer, go ahead and look." Now he starts digging. He opens your trunk. He moves your gym bag. He finds your range bag. He opens it. Maybe there's a stray round of ammunition rolling around in the bottom of the trunk. In some jurisdictions, having loose ammo accessible to the driver is a crime. Or he finds a knife that's half an inch too long under a local ordinance. Or he creates a mess, damages your upholstery, and keeps you on the side of the road for 45 minutes while he calls a canine unit, all because you said yes. You gain absolutely nothing by consenting to a search. There is no prize for being the most cooperative, most search driver. There is only risk. So, the officer has just handed you your license back. He pauses and then says, "Hey, before you go, do you mind if I take a quick look in the back? You don't have anything illegal, right?" Your brain is going to scream at you to start explaining. "No, I didn't do anything. Why do you want to look? I support the police, but I'm just in a hurry." Don't do any of that. Don't explain. Don't justify. Don't argue. You need to use a specific phrase that is legally watertight and easy to remember. Now, before I give you the 7 words, I want to warn you about something important. This script is useless if you fall for the canine bluff. Police are trained to use a very specific threat about bringing a drug dog to get you to abandon this script and give in. I'll show you exactly how to handle that in a minute. First, you need to memorize the line. Here is the script. "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." 7 words. Let's break it down. First, the word consent. That's a legal term. You are not just saying, "I'd rather you not." You are clearly saying you are not granting legal permission. That matters a lot later when a judge reviews body cam footage. Second, any searches. This is critical. You are not just saying don't look in the trunk or don't look in the back. You are covering the entire vehicle, trunk, glove box, back seat, containers, bags, cases, anything that could be considered part of your vehicle or inside your vehicle. You don't want the officer playing word games like, "Well, he only said I couldn't search the trunk, so I opened the center console instead." Now let's talk about tone, because this is where people get themselves in trouble. You do not need to shout this. You do not need to be angry. Getting visibly angry or aggressive can be interpreted as suspicious behavior and escalate the situation. You want to be calm, respectful, and firm. Look the officer in the eye and say it like you are ordering a cup of coffee. "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." That's it. Then you stop talking. In a perfect world, the officer would shrug and say, "Okay, have a nice day," and send you on your way. We don't live in that world. Police officers are trained communicators. They are trained to overcome objections, just like a salesperson. When you say, "I do not consent," they're likely going to push back. You need to be ready for their counter moves, so you don't get rattled and give in. The most common rebuttal is something like, "Well, if you don't have anything to hide, why are you worried? If you're innocent, why not just let me look?" This is designed to make you feel guilty or defensive. It attacks your integrity. It's a psychological trick, not a legal argument. Do not fall for it. Do not say, "Because it's my right," even though it is. Don't start debating the Constitution on the side of the highway. Don't blurt out, "I have guns in there, and I don't want you to take them." You are not there to win a philosophy debate. If the officer says, "If you've got nothing to hide, just let me look," you simply repeat your script. "I understand, officer, but I do not consent to any searches." That's it. You are a broken record. You are a brick wall. No matter what he says, you calmly go back to that line. Here's the big one, the canine bluff. Sometimes, when you refuse consent, the officer will escalate. He will say, "Fine, if you won't let me look, I'll just call a canine unit." The dog is going to walk around your car. If he alerts, "I'm searching anyway." So we can do this the easy way or the hard way. That sounds terrifying. It is meant to scare you into changing your answer. Here's what you need to know. Under the Supreme Court's ruling in Rodriguez versus United States, an officer generally cannot extend a traffic stop longer than necessary to issue the ticket just to wait for a dog, unless he has additional reasonable suspicion. If the business part of the stop is over, he can't legally make you sit there for 30 extra minutes just because you refuse to search. Now, will some officers still try? Yes, but that doesn't change your strategy. If he threatens to bring a dog, you do not suddenly give in and say, "Fine, just search." you stick with your script. Officer, I do not consent to any searches. And then you add the second most important phrase in your arsenal. Officer, am I free to go? This is the checkmate move. Remember, the officer is trying to keep this in the gray area of a consensual conversation where you're just chatting on the side of the road. By asking, am I free to go? You force him to make a clear legal decision. He has two choices. He says yes, in which case you calmly leave. Or he says no, which means you are now being detained. If he says, no, you are not free to go, your strategy changes immediately. You stop talking. You immediately say, I am going to remain silent, and then you do it. You don't complain. You don't argue. You don't answer questions about where you're going or where you've been. You sit there and wait. At that point, he is building a case. Anything you say can be twisted and used against you later. Do not help him. I want to talk for a minute about the concept of scope in a search, because this is where a lot of people try to be clever and end up in trouble. Some of you might think, well, I know my trunk is clean, so I'll let him check the trunk, but not the cabin. Or, I'll let him look through the windows, but I won't let him open any doors. Do not play this game. Trying to manage a limited consent search on the side of the road is a nightmare. If you say, you can look in the back, what does the back mean? Back seat, trunk, under the floor panels? If you say, you can check the car, does that include your locked gun case? Courts have generally ruled that if you give general consent to search a vehicle, that consent extends to any container inside the vehicle that could hold the object of the search. If he says, I'm looking for drugs, and you say, go ahead and search the car, he can open your aspirin bottle. He can unzip your gym bag. He can open boxes, cases, wrapped packages, anything that could possibly contain drugs. And here is the kicker, damage. If you consent to a search and the officer rips your upholstery, breaks a latch on your expensive gun case, or scratches your interior while looking, you have very little legal recourse. You invited him to do it. Courts often rule that minor damage is part of the search process you agreed to. Don't try to negotiate the boundaries of a search on the shoulder of a highway. The only safe boundary is no consent. Now let's talk about passengers and rental cars, because these situations trip up a lot of otherwise smart gun owners. Scenario 1. You're driving, your buddy is in the passenger seat. He's got his own backpack at his feet. The officer asks you for consent to search the car. You panic and say yes. Does your consent allow the officer to search your buddy's backpack? This is a complex legal area, and it touches cases like Wyoming versus Houghton. In general, if the police have probable cause to search the car for something like drugs, they can often search passengers' belongings that might conceal that item. But when it's a consent search, the Supreme Court has suggested that a driver cannot validly consent to the search of a passenger's clearly personal belongings, like a purse or a backpack that obviously belonged to someone else. Here's the point. Don't rely on the officer to understand or respect those nuances. If you are a passenger and the driver gives consent, you should speak up immediately and clearly. Officer, I do not consent to a search of my bags or my person. You are drawing a line around your property and your body. Scenario 2. Rental cars. For a long time, there was a myth, even some officers believed it, that if you weren't listed on the rental agreement, you had no Fourth Amendment rights in that car. They would say, it's a rental, you don't own it, so you have no expectation of privacy. I don't need your permission. The Supreme Court case Bird versus United States cleared this up. Even if you are not listed on the rental agreement, if you are in lawful possession of that car, you still have a reasonable expectation of privacy. You still have Fourth Amendment protection. You can still say no. So if an officer tells you, it's a rental, I don't need your permission, that is wrong. If you are the one driving it lawfully, you absolutely have the right to refuse consent to a search. Let's look at the worst case scenario. You do everything right. You look the officer in the eye and say, calmly and respectfully, Officer, I do not consent to any searches. He stares back at you and says, too bad. Get out of the car. Your heart sinks. He's going to search anyway. What do you do now? Do you physically block him? Stand in front of the door? Start shouting? Absolutely not. If an officer decides to search your car against your will, do not physically resist. I cannot stress this enough. If you physically interfere, you are almost guaranteed to be arrested for obstruction, resisting, or even assault on an officer. You might get tossed. You might get hurt. And in court, you will lose. If he searches after you've clearly refused consent, one of two things is happening. 1, he believes he has probable cause, and he might be wrong, but that's an argument for a judge, not for you on the roadside. Or 2, he is knowingly violating your rights. In either case, the battle is no longer happening on the street. The battle has moved to the courtroom. Your job now is to be a good witness. Step back. Keep your mouth shut. Watch what he does. If you have a dash cam, make sure it's recording. If you have a passenger, quietly tell them to record with their phone at a safe distance without interfering. By clearly stating, "I do not consent to any searches before the search began," you have handed your lawyer a very powerful tool. Let's say the officer finds something, maybe a gun that isn't perfectly compliant with some obscure local rule. Your lawyer can file what's called a motion to suppress. He can say to the judge, "Your Honor, my client refused consent. The officer had no probable cause. Therefore, the search was illegal, and everything found is fruit of the poisonous tree." If the judge agrees, that evidence is thrown out. The case falls apart. You win. But if you had said yes to the search, that motion is basically off the table. You waived your protection. The evidence stands. You lose. We've covered a lot. Let's quickly recap your action plan for the next time you see those flashing lights. Especially if you have firearms in the car. Pull over safely. Turn off the car. Turn on the interior lights at night. Keep your hands on the wheel. Be polite but brief. Hand over your documents. Answer basic identifying questions. Do not volunteer extra information. Recognize the doorknob moment. When the officer hands your ID back and then says, "Can I ask you a question? Or do you mind if I search?" Understand that the traffic stop is legally over. Use the script. Look him in the eye and say, calmly and firmly, "Officer, I do not consent to any searches." If he pushes, add the second line, "Officer, am I free to go?" And if he detains you, say, "I am going to remain silent." As gun owners, it's easy to feel like you've got a target on your back. You want to prove you're the good guy. You want to cooperate. But the best way to be a law-abiding citizen is to uphold the law, including the Constitution. Refusing a search does not make you a criminal. It makes you a citizen who knows his rights. Police officers have a job to do. I respect that. But you have a job too, to protect yourself, your family, and your rights. Don't make their job easier by doing yours for them. If you found this deep dive helpful, the next thing you need to know is what to do when the police are not behind you in a car, but standing at your front door. The rules there are completely different. Click on the video on your screen right now to learn exactly what to say and what not to say when there's a knock at your door from law enforcement. Stay safe, stay legal, and I'll see you in the next one.